Welcome to Unlikely Intersections, the podcast where intent, impact, and inquiry inspire our conversations. I'm Dr. Philip Brown with my good friend Dr. Terry Jackson, and you're at the intersection. Fascinating thing about intersections, we all go through many intersections daily, and the way we navigate these determines the trajectory of our days and of our life. Interesting topic today, Terry, fluid thinking.
Fluid thinking. We all should think fluidly on a regular basis. But in order to do so, we got to figure out what is it that gets people stuck, right? What gets people stuck? And why do they get, stuck where they are, And we've all done it at some point in time, gotten stuck for whatever reason. Maybe it's, an emotional attachment to whatever it is. But we have to first kind of figure that out. Because fluid mindset is where we really need to be. Fluid, going with the flow, fluid, thinking, being able to connect the dots. And sad to say, I'm not quite so sure if our educational system teaches us how to connect the dots. I found that connecting the dots was something that I did after my stint in high school, even undergrad, and to go through the master's program. I really didn't begin to think fluidly and connecting all the dots until probably PhD process.
So many different ways to think about it. The truth of it is about getting stuck is that we all get stuck. It's the human condition, and there's a great book that I've just read actually twice in the last 2 or 3 weeks by Michael Singer called The Untethered Soul. And it really talks about where that comes from. And, that basically he uses a metaphorical representation of it that I think describes why we get stuck a lot of times. And he says, just imagine you're driving down a highway and maybe it's beautiful, it's fall day, beautiful trees, and you're taking it all in. Just the visual stimulus of the outside environment is just playing out on a movie screen in your mind. And, all is right with the world. It's just going by. You're in the moment. That energy is flowing through you. And then all of a sudden, a car comes up beside you and, maybe it's I think he uses a blue Mustang, for example, and it reminds you of a former relationship you had, and you see the person in there and they're snuggled up with somebody else, and then all of a sudden, you pass into this thought mindset where you're thinking only about that, and maybe it's what did I do wrong in that relationship? What did that person do wrong in that relationship? How can it be like it is? Blue Mustangs are, a bad place for me to be. And next thing you know, you've driven 20 miles and you haven't seen a single tree because you've been stuck in this trapped thought pattern that has arisen from your own doing. And ultimately, it's oversimplification. He says it much, much better than I'm saying it. The truth of it is that something has happened to you in your life that didn't meet the conditions that you yourself had put on happiness. So I would be happy if these conditions were met. They weren't. And so you trapped this pattern of energy, buried it down inside somewhere, and inevitably later it's going to come up. Some trigger from the environment will hit you, and it'll take you right back there. And we've all experienced that frequently. And it's really powerful to think about that. So what do you then really need to be able to do to regain that fluid mindset where everything just flows through your thought pattern instead of getting stuck?
That makes me think about a couple things. There's a phrase that we like to use, it is what it is. And I think what's probably more appropriate as we reflect back on those experiences that we've had and they take us back to that place it is what it was.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
It is what it was,
That's right.
right? And so if it is what it was, then what I need to do is continue to move forward with it, because what we've learned through CPM is I can't do anything about the past. What I can do is change the story of what I tell myself. Now, everyone hasn't gone through that training, so we have to be able to understand that. So there are going to be people who are going to get stuck. But it comes down to acceptance. Let me accept what happened, whatever that experience was. It did happen. It made my life probably better given what the learnings were from that. And so I have to understand that it is what it was. It did happen. There's nothing I can do about it now. Let me reflect on maybe the good time I had with that person that I dated. Not that I did something that enabled me to think negatively about that particular. What was the good from it? You know, I got a message the other day from one of in the first CPM course that I took. There was a young lady visiting the States, and now she's going back to India today, her and her family. And pretty upbeat person, right? But I got a WhatsApp text yesterday that says, you know, I'm kind of down, I'm struggling, I'm packing because the family and I are getting together and we're getting ready to head back to India. So she really didn't want to leave because she was visiting her brother and her sister-in-law and their newly born baby. So she didn't want to leave, so she was struggling emotionally about that. And I said, think about all the great times you had over the last month while you were here. Rewrite the story that you're telling yourself in your head around the dread of going back to India, getting on this long flight, and think about all the joy that you had while you were here. So she changed the story, alternate reality of where she was, and it helped her throughout the day. So that instantly came to mind is what was the joy that I experienced in the time? And she said, hey, I met people that I never thought I would have met before. She never thought she would have met me having been in the CPM course. She comes all the way from India to meet, you know, and she's with her family, and she connects with a lot of people across the states. And then we agree to meet, and we met in Melbourne. And so we had about a 2 or 3 hour conversation. And so she met people that she never would have met. And she said, you know, I never would have thought this going through the CPM course. I say, so reflect on all of that. Because it is what it is, and it is what it was.
Yeah, it's really powerful. I mean, there's, you know, we end up trapping ourselves with arbitrary rules that we and we alone have made up for what it takes. Mm-hmm. And it kind of helps me to reflect on the fact that, you know, we're small and short-lived. You know, best case scenario, unless you win the genetic lottery, about 90, 91, you're out of here. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Humans have been around 200,000 years. The planet's been here 4.5 billion years. Mm-hmm. And the universe 13.8 billion years. Mm-hmm. So, you know, to think that there's got to be this really strict set of conditions in order for me to be happy just doesn't make sense. Because how would it ever really happen that way? It will always come up short of whatever that criteria I apply to it is. So much better to just let what is happening happen and be a part of my consciousness, live with that. And then, you know, it doesn't mean I don't work on things to make them a certain way in the future, but it does mean that I take what's here. Got a good friend who has a saying, says you know, it's similar to it is what it is, but it's really things are exactly as they should be.
Yeah, that's right. Because you hear people say, you know, I'm not where I want to be in life. No, but you're right where you're supposed to be, right? That word expectation, and I struggle with this. I struggle with expectation, and I struggle with it because from a business perspective, you set expectations, you know, you're creating budget, you're creating pro formas of how you want to perform. Even for your personal self, you create expectations of things you'd like to achieve, right? And then I remember Sam Walton, you know, the founder of Walmart, saying, I think, and this may be a paraphrase, he says, high expectation is the key to everything. So you want to set a high expectation. Then there's another mindset that says no expectations. Whatever happens, happens, right? And expectations is what cause disappointment, right? Because you set it. And then we go to Dr. Rao, And he may say it's already written,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So what do you do? What philosophy do you follow? And so sometimes I'll say I don't have any expectations, but then does that mean that what I'm expecting is I'm expecting not the best? Case in point, and my daughter told me this. I said, you know what? When I go to some of these fast food restaurants now, and I go through the drive-through, I don't even expect my order to be correct. And guess what happens? I drive out, and it's not correct. Well, I expected that. I expected that. Well, maybe because you expected it, maybe that's why it happened. I love to give people the benefit of the doubt, right? But when it's continuous, you have to question, what it actually is. She's saying that I'm putting in place what's going to happen before I get there. And I kind of believe in that as well. And so, but if I have no expectation, then what? I kind of believe now that I shouldn't let anybody put any expectations on me. If I'm going to I should set my own expectation for myself, not to accept anybody else's expectation, right? And so I struggle. I struggle with where should I be? And Dr. Rao would say, just be.
Yeah. Well, that's right. And it's interesting because all these things are coexisting, right? Like there's no single answer, right? It's not a binary thing where it's either a 0 or a 1. Both are true to a certain extent. I'm a big believer in high expectations, kind of thinking of things at the visionary level of what can be. And then, as you, in the business context or goal setting context for yourself, you get into this thing where you say, okay, these are the steps and this is what it looks like. And the temptation is to get really outcome focused right there, which I know, like when I'm particularly stressed, I do tend to get way too outcome focused, because one of the things about every phase of planning that is just a truism is that you have to place a certain number of assumptions in that plan. Otherwise, there are too many variables and it just the math can never work. And those assumptions are merely things that are plausible. Has no bearing in what will really happen once you get out there and start doing whatever it is that you're doing. And so by focusing on, those goals as a general direction, and then really applying yourself strongly to what you think it takes to get there, but not being so hung up in the absolute of where you're trying to get. To me, that's what fluid thinking is, right? Because you see all these new opportunities that come along the way, and you may not be going linearly from point A to point B, but you actually may be able to take some of these pathways that take you from A to C or D or E, because just being fully engaged with the here and now shows you better options.
Yeah. I think about college graduates. They're coming out, over the last couple of weeks. They've been graduating, and fluid thinking. Not quite so sure they're taught that, right? They probably learned it after the fact, right? They've gotten all the academic learning. They've passed all the tests. They've written all the papers. But the fluid thinking piece is that's what the real world is, right? As you were just walking through that example, I began to think about how things have been happening in my life, right? The fluidity of it all. What I can say is this: when things happen, I can always reflect back on the point when I begin to focus on that. And it may have been 8 months ago, and then all of a sudden something happens, and I'm like, I just had that happen the other day. At the beginning of the year, we talked about quantum leaping and all that kind of thing. So I wrote down a bunch of goals, just my thought process. And so I get a call the other day about an opportunity somebody wants to know if I know anyone who could potentially help them. I'm like, yeah, I think I know somebody. So I have a conversation with this gentleman who lives in Hong Kong, and he says, "Man, that sounds interesting to me." I said, "Okay." And then I reflect. Somehow it hit me. I wrote that down as a part of my journal. And now it's coming to fruition. I'd like to be a part of this kind of deal at some point in time in my life. And it all came right back to me. And I went to the journal, I opened up the page, and I looked at it, and I said, okay, this is what's happening right now. So the fluid thinking, the visionary thinking, the quantum thinking, if you want to call it manifestation, whatever you want to call it, there's power. There's power there to it, right? Because I've experienced it so many times in my life. And like I said, this past weekend, I'm like, wow, this is what I was talking about. So I believe in fluid thinking. I like to think that I'm a fluid thinker. Do I get stuck? Yeah, I get stuck from time to time. I don't stay there long because I say to myself, that whole conditioning process, got to move on. Got to do something different. It was what it was, right? You got to move on. I got to live while I'm living.
Yeah, yeah. Well, the power of that, the power of that particular way of thinking is that even though you, like all of us, get stuck, it's not permanent.
Yep.
And that's one of the great things. Life gives us every chance to clear these blockages that we have, right? Like every time something comes back in your head that's a bad experience, a Blue Mustang experience, maybe we'll call it, from the book. It's life giving you another chance to get rid of that, to let that energy flow on through and just let that go, and to become aware of what's happening now, and understand that, a lot of what even happened was just a construct.
Right.
And you're going to miss a lot of life if you don't turn it loose. Because every time one of those things comes up, if you get stuck, you miss all the trees going by.
Like I said, I got to live while I'm living, and it's not that I'm trying to be disrespectful to anything, because I get a lot of these calls, but so-and-so passed today or so. I regret that happened, but I got to live. That's a part of the process. Again, I go back to acceptance. It's a part of the process of life. And in the process of life, you get the birth, you get the growth, you get the maturity, you get the decline, and then you get the demise, right?
That's right.
And so with that, I've accepted that process as a part of what my life is. So as I look out into nature, I see all of that happening, and I know that I'm a part of nature. I'm not separate from it. So at some point in time, my demise is going to come, and so they're going to be the demise of friends, and you start to see it, and and so, but I have to continue to think fluidly, because there's still a lot that I want to accomplish. Right? It's not that there's no stopping of my dreams. My dreams continue to flow, right? Whereas some people, you might look at them and you say, "Oh man, that guy, he's not dreaming anymore. He's lost his zest for life." Well, that's not the case with me. There's so much more that I like to be able to achieve, because, as you said earlier, I know what's possible. I know what's possible in life. I've looked around the universe, and you see all these people doing all these great things, and not that I have to do anything great, but I know what the possibilities are. And so why wouldn't I utilize fluid thinking to try to achieve some of those possibilities, or surpass some of those possibilities?
Yeah, since you brought it up, death can be our greatest teacher.
Yes.
It's inevitable,
Mm-hmm.
and it's unpredictable.
Mm-hmm.
And when you put yourself in the space of, if I had a known limited time left, maybe it's just a day, maybe I get a week, maybe it's 3 months, pick it. What would I do? Man, it gives you a great decision tool for, am I willing to invest my time today in this or not? You know, I mean, and since none of us get out alive, there's not a whole lot of reason to at least experiment with that kind of thinking from time to time. Can do wonders with relationships, you know, and really help us become more expressive, I think. But it's also hard to do.
Yeah. And you know, one of the most famous MBA schools in the country, in one of their courses, they have all of their students write their obituary while they're there. And so I kind of adopted that into my coaching practice. And I remember asking a couple of people to write their obituary. And they were like, ooh, what do you mean, write my obituary? It's the same as me asking you to paint the picture of the future. Because what you're saying by writing your obit is you're putting in place right now things, how you want to be remembered when you're no longer here. So here are the things you're going to achieve. So you're writing down, you're creating your future. Basically, but they hear obituary and they think death, and it's so morbid, right? But I'm asking you to create your future so that people will remember you by, and so you have a tendency to go by that. Now, once they get past the hearing obituary, write your own obituary, and they finally do it, then all of a sudden they begin to reflect back on it. You know what? Wow, I was able to accomplish this and this, and it makes so much sense now. Because what I'm asking you to do is over the next 20, 30 years, here are the things you're going to achieve because here's how you want to be remembered.
The power becomes evident. It really does.
Yes.
And what happens, because it's, you know, again, you've gone through the exercise of thinking through. It helps you pick up inconsistencies. It really does help you become what you wrote down, right? Maybe it's an interaction with your family. Maybe it's who knows what it could be. Maybe it's something that you might not have done otherwise because it seemed hard, but because you had said you wanted it to be part of that legacy, you feel compelled to give it a try. And I've done that exercise several times. In fact, I think it's almost worthy of an annual revisit, you know, not only to check in on how you're doing, but to realize that today's you may conceive of things differently than yesterday's you. Some of those things you might choose to take out. You might add some. But it's that constant, you know, self-actualization process where you're really growing, where you're really trying to understand who you are.
There's a friend of mine who's, 5, 6 years older. But she indicated that she started keeping a journal when she was 18. And she's been keeping a journal every day. She's written in her journal every day since her age 18, and she's 5 or 6 years older. So I can imagine. I was like, well, when are you going to turn that into a book, right, about, you know, your life? Because that's what it enables you to do. You are able to see who you were and who you are to kind of think into who you'd like to become, given all that you've seen in your time as you journal about yourself, right? And you can do the gap analysis on what is, what was, because I've done it. You know, I write down little goals in the book, and I go back and look and say, man, you know, I wasn't able to achieve this. I wonder why. Oh, here's why I wasn't able to do that, because I ceased doing this. I need to continue to do this. I need to restart doing these things again, because here is when I had the greatest success, right? When I can connect all the dots. It's because I was doing these things and somehow they slipped. And then all of a sudden, what happens is, from a fluid thinking perspective, I don't even need to look at that anymore. I begin to sense that I'm not doing those things. Oh, I wasn't doing this. I need to get back. So now it becomes about mental conditioning of what has helped me be, quote unquote, and I don't like the word successful. What's helped me achieve what I wanted to achieve, because there was a process and I got away from the process, right? Not the outcome. I had this process that produced these outcomes and they were favorable. So guess what I need to do? I need to get back to the process.
Yeah, you know, and that it triggered my thinking right there as you were going through talking about your thought process and your mindset and having something dwell in your consciousness. You know, another thing they not touch on, it's a central theme of the Untethered Soul book is, you know, who are you? And, you know, it gets at the idea that we're the consciousness of us. And I use a lot of different examples. It's like, you know, when you were 8 years old and you looked into a mirror, you realized that was you as you defined yourself then. And at every stage all along the way, you would look in that mirror and it would still be you. You were aware that it was you, but you look a lot different now than you did when you were 8. And all those different stages. So we're actually the awareness. We're the awareness of the sum total of our thoughts, our emotions, and the external environment that we perceive. And to the extent that we get stuck in one of those tracks, maybe we get stuck in our emotions, maybe we're extremely sad or elated, those other things, you know, we lose our consciousness for a time and we become sad or we become elated. Same thing with our thoughts. How many times I'll speak for myself, have I found myself with just one thought pattern spinning around in my head? I look like a bulldog. I can't put it down, you know. It just, and that's what makes a person get stuck. But being able to draw back to that consciousness level and say, who is that feels upset? Who is that thinks that if I don't get an A on this test, my life is ruined? Who is that? And you pretty quickly realize, oh, okay, I get it. That's just some thoughts. You know, I'm at a higher level than that. I'm just aware of it. And, you know, our listeners can take a test on this, right? If you wonder if this is true, in your head, just say hello to yourself. Just say it 4 or 5 times. And you'll hear your own voice saying hello. And then you'll realize you're not that mental chatter. You're not that little mental chatter in there saying hello to yourself. You're something higher. And that enables fluid thinking at a much greater level because it prevents you from getting stuck.
You know, we have experiences in life, and sometimes we might have a disagreement with someone around something. And, you know, all of a sudden we realize that there's space that happens in that relationship, right, for whatever reason. Especially when you're growing up and, you know, you're striving for a space in life amongst just your peers, whether it's at work, whether it's the guys you grew up with. So from time to time, there are things that happen, right? And so what I've noticed is things that may have happened that I may necessarily didn't agree with. So there was some space created in a relationship, right? A good friend, and you know, all of a sudden the space is there. You know, I decided I was going to take the high road, and I was going to be the glue. So I was going to reconnect those around me who were very good friends and reconnect them on the fact that we're all human and we all make mistakes, right? You may have done some things I didn't necessarily like, but at the end of the day, we grew up together. There's certain things that never should come between us, given what these relationships were, right? How we, as I like to say, we bled together, we sweated together, we cried together playing ball. We did some stupid things together growing up. Those are bonds to me. Those bonds shouldn't be lost. I should be able to feel like it was yesterday. Right. Now, Maybe that's a place where I get stuck. Maybe that's a place of saying that it was this way, it should always be this way, knowing that things change. But there are relationships from a human perspective that should remain, that should stay intact. Whether I've seen you yesterday or I saw you 15 years ago, when we reconnect, those moments should happen. All those moments should be special.
Yeah, you're not starting from ground zero in that. And, one of the sayings I like, I think it's attributed to actually Brian Stevenson, the civil rights attorney, is that, we're all more than the worst thing we've ever done. Mm-hmm. And when you were talking about kind of the whole journaling concept and all, and that really becomes a book of me.
Mm-hmm.
Each of our book of me's is filled with, great achievements and horror stories. Mm-hmm. All of it, mm-hmm. right? It's all, just a spectrum of things, and to think through it with a spirit of gratitude and say, thank you for the past. It's made me who I am, mm-hmm. and put me in a position that today I can be here and be present and experience the energy that's going through. I mean, I think that's really powerful. It's one of the things that folks have the hardest time about is that past.
Mm-hmm.
And, the first forgiveness has to be yourself. And we've talked about this before, but it's of critical importance to forgive yourself for things you did before you knew better.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And then once you know better, to do better, mm-hmm. and be, that's growth in my opinion, and that's what it all is. And we talk about this concept of fluid thinking, and I get at it actually in the Do You Speak Patient book, but not in so many words, mm-hmm. Because the whole fluid thinking between the medical professional and the patient, that has to be dynamic, mm-hmm. because there a lot of times are multiple different treatments you can do for an illness, mm-hmm. and then the patient has a set of variables that are important to them, and you have to co-create, mm-hmm. what that treatment plan is, which is nothing but an exercise in fluid thinking.
It takes me right to transformational thinking, right? Challenge all assumptions, right? So if I'm challenging all that, it's got to be fluid. Fluid thinking, man. I got a situation I'm struggling with right now, right, about a friend. And I saw a post on Facebook that bothered me by a friend, guy who we played ball together, we slept in the same bed together, we were like brothers and still are. At least I consider that. And I saw a post that he made to another friend of ours, and it was bothersome. And so I've been trying to figure out how to correct that friend. Maybe correction is not the right word, but at least address it from an awareness perspective. And I'm going to do it. I just gotta pick the time. And so as I think through what that conversation should look like, because it's a delicate topic, right? I have to try to fluidly think through the process of the verbiage to be used, because I value the person's friendship, I value his brotherhood, but I need to kind of pull him on the carpet to have a conversation with him, because he knows better than what he said. And he probably doesn't even know that I know this, but I've been struggling with that. So I'm stuck. Mm-hmm. I'm stuck in how I should handle that situation, but I will handle it. And it's just a matter of when, it'll probably just hit me in the fluidity, right? It'll probably just hit me in the moment, and I'll take that drive and say, hey, I need to speak to you for about 10, 15 minutes. And here's what I saw, and this is what I want you to consider.
Yeah, and that gets us to, the whole thing of anytime we're stuck, especially if we're persistently stuck, There are one or more mental models that we're using that are misfit to the situation. And it's a fascinating way to think about it, right? Because it's just another form of whatever has me stuck it has me stuck because it's inconsistent with how I think the world ought to be. But we got to go back to an episode that I know we've already recorded is who am I to say what that is?
Yep.
It's like because there's so many missing pieces, and the same is true of each of us, right? So that gets us back to another concept we've talked about is each of our personal truths, or you could call them realities. But in relationships, in organizations, in teams, one of the most important things is to understand that there's a reciprocal obligation to acknowledge the other person's truth or their reality. And to the extent that you can do that as a practice, then performance is enhanced immensely. I mean, that's really the secret to team function or organizational function or even individual healthy relationships is there are multiple different truths that people hold dear, and they're not mutually exclusive.
Right. And sometimes people's truth is their truth, not the truth. And sometimes those truths are created by the environment in which they are. And oftentimes those environments create truths that are just not supported by any evidence whatsoever. And that's the kind of situation that I have to address with a friend.
Right. Yeah. Well, there are a ton of us running around. Don't confuse me with the facts, man.
Exactly. Exactly.
We have such a strong drive, and again, it's based on all those patterns that have been part of our lives. We have all these drives to have things be a certain way, to the extent that, and we see it actually. You see it all over the country right now, that people are just adopting positions that really are unfounded in reality, right? It's just, you can call it founded on their own bias, of various kinds. But, the truth of it is every time we have a preference, that's a bias.
That's right.
Right?
That's
I mean,
right.
plain and simple, at its simplest terms, if I prefer, this color shirt, that's just a preference. Doesn't have anything to do with whether the other unlikely intersection shirts or good-looking shirts or wear the same or anything.
Right.
And we just have to be careful all along the way of trying to force our personal preference into some rule, into some regulation, or into some set of circumstances that should govern others. At the end of the day, again, there's a give and take. There's a ton of what I'll call dynamic polarity that exists for a reason. It's important, right? That's how energy even works, right? The poles. And so we just have to acknowledge that. We have to work with it. And that's where the fluidity comes in. Yeah. It's kind of like, I can use a vascular surgery analogy of blood flow, and we could just as easily use a stream or river that's flowing. And if there's nothing in the way, there's no turbulence in that flow, that water just goes and goes. But put a big rock in the way, or in vascular surgery, put a big, plaque in the way, and you get all this turbulence, and that turbulence creates side effects. Yes. In the case of vascular surgery, it's bad. In the case of some bodies of water, it's just part of nature, and maybe that's where you catch the fish in the eddy. But the point is that all that water ultimately is going to flow through there. And even if there is some turbulence, you don't want to turn that little obstacle into a dam.
Right.
You still want that water to flow. And at the end of the day, every drop of water in every river is going to the ocean.
That's right.
And it doesn't cease to become the river at that point.
That's right.
That water just becomes, and that river just becomes the ocean.
And it's like friendship, right? Regardless of your friendship, there are going to be moments where you just don't agree, right? But that shouldn't prevent the friendship. Then you get to the point where you agree to disagree, right? You agree to disagree with that, and it continues to flow, given the fact that you agree to disagree, and that's okay because I'm me and you're you, and so we're not going to see the world the same. But maybe we can, because we're friends, we probably see a lot of things similarly, right? But there are going to be those moments, as with those guys who, just an analogy of sports. I'm a Pittsburgh Steelers fan. Friends who are Dallas Cowboy fans. I don't care what they say. I'm gonna dislike the Dallas Cowboys, right? just from a point of having fun, I'm going to be. I'm always going to play devil's advocate. When in fact, I realize Dallas has a very good team.
Yeah, not good enough to win it in the last 3 decades.
Yeah, yeah. But not that they didn't have the talent, whatever the reason was, right? So I'm a Pittsburgh Steelers fan, but I also like how the Baltimore Ravens are built, right? They're built similar to like the Steelers were built, right? A lot of similarities, physical, smash mouth football. But when they play the Steelers, guess what I want? I want the Steelers to win. I want the Ravens to lose, right? But I understand they're very good. So we're going to have those moments in the friendship where whether it's fun based or whether it's very serious, where we're going to have those disagreements. You got to have those tough conversations, right? But that tough conversation is coming from a position of friendship.
And you're talking about really the concept of dynamic equilibrium.
Yes.
And that's how everything actually works. That's how everything works in nature. We can learn a lot from nature, as you've said many, many times. There has to be that flow, a dynamic equilibrium where, sometimes these things kind of go this way. They can go too far, and if they do, there'll be a correction. And over time, there's this healthy tension between different perspectives that make things work right. That's ultimately what drives performance. There's, that just the right amount of tension, which is artful, right? It's not, and that's one of the things that I know you as well as I both really like to help teams and help people understand how to make happen. It's not ever going to happen by accident.
Right.
When there's not intention behind it and when there's not understanding of what it means, that's when you get these wild swings. And that's really not equilibrium, right? That's a pendulum swinging crazy, and when it gets on either extreme, it's like a wrecking ball. What we're looking for is, that dynamic tension that drives performance, that makes iron sharpen iron, if you will. And there's a way to get there. It's not necessarily an easy way, but it's a way that, with the right guidance, I really believe most people, most organizations, and most teams can get there.
As you said, intentional, or I'm going to say purposeful, right? I think about the analogy of sandpaper and what does sandpaper do. It's rough, but ultimately what sandpaper does is it helps make the rough edges smooth. It smooths down all pieces of wood that it's utilized on, right? And so initially that's the tension. It's that abrasiveness that all of a sudden you just, oh man, this is so smooth. But it was something abrasive that made the smooth, right? And so with that, I like the analogy of being sandpaper, right? Because the ultimate purpose is to make everything smooth.
Yeah, so many metaphors about team function and unit function. Storming, forming, storming, norming, and performing, and all those. I mean, lots of different metaphorical representations of it. but the nuts and bolts of it are all kind of functions of the same thing, and it comes down to many of the principles that really govern a peaceful life, which is, respect for other people, respect for different perspectives, willingness to entertain and acknowledge differences, and, ultimately settling on a common purpose to do something for the greater good. If you put all those things together, miracles happen. We see it every day.
Yep, every day. And I think I was put here for a purpose, right? And given that purpose, there's going to be all those dynamics as you just described, right? But at the end of the day, I have to maintain what that purpose is. I have to walk in that purpose and live in that purpose. Even though if I listen to Dr. Rao, he's going to say the purpose is to just be. Right? Which I struggle, which I still kind of struggle with the just being, right? Because just being I kind of equate it to stillness, but I don't think he means that it's stillness, right? It's just that whole development of self, and the elimination of the ego, and just being the self, being the I. As I struggle with the mantras or affirmations, adding something after I am, because he says now that distorts the whole I am piece of it, right? Because now you're saying something and I'm like, wow, okay. So now I just say I am versus I am gratitude, right? Yeah, it's just a different mindset, which ties right into this whole thinking of fluid thinking, right? Because it's about learning, continuous learning. And so that's the fluidity of it all. I may not be who I was last year because I learned something totally different, right? But it became fluid at some point in time, just to continue to learn and to know that I don't know.
Yeah, the pervasive question I've been working recently in terms of almost mantra like is who am I, right? And when I get into a moment where my thoughts are somewhere, or I'm in a situation that I'm not sure how to navigate, or a certain emotional state, I ask myself, who am I? And I realize that I'm none of those issues. I'm aware of all those issues, but that's not me. And it creates enough distance, or what folks call detachment, to really be able to get into a problem solving place, right? It takes a lot of the sting out when you can realize, hey, I've actually got a front row seat to how I'm feeling, how I'm thinking, and what I'm perceiving. And who I am is a little higher in the balcony than where I am. And then that's way different. One of the things that we've taught is, be in the arena or be on the court when you're problem solving. Those are a dynamic equilibrium as well, right? Like, you can be a great problem solver. Jocko Willink talks about it a lot of times, about the whole detachment piece, right? Is almost being able to look down on the totality of the situation in a different way, so that you don't launch into some emotional assault on yourself usually, but often on others as well, or into some finite thought process that oversimplifies the current situation, right? And just that detachment piece, I think that's really important. And the question, being fluid enough in your thinking to jump back out of that, is something that I trigger currently just with the practice of who am I.
Yeah. Lot of work, right? Lots of being cognitively tired, right? Because it's the conversation with self. And what does that sound like for a lot of people, right? The constant questioning, which is a great thing. And sometimes not even moving forward, not being able to move forward because you haven't come to the right answer of who am I? Or to the answer, an answer. It's because it remains the question. Just when you think you have the answer, you don't.
That's right.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's
exactly.
like people who say that they're grateful, right? As soon as you say you're grateful, you've lost it. It's not anything you can really grasp and hold and say I am grateful and I have gratitude, because as soon as you utter it, it's gone.
Yeah, it's kind of like the saying, as soon as you teach a child that what they're seeing is a rabbit, they no longer see the rabbit.
That's right. That's right.
You're like, what the hell does that mean?
Yeah.
But it is this quest of thinking of going beyond. It has to go beyond the thought process. It has to be felt. It has to be understood, and that's perpetual, because one of the things about our consciousness, our awareness, is constantly drawn to stimuli. If you don't believe it, let somebody make a loud noise behind you when you're trying to do some kind of work, right?
That's right.
And you're like, just, that attention gets drawn to all kinds of things, and that kind of gets you at the value of doing some of this work, whether it's mindfulness or meditation or journaling or any of it. It is a way to kind of bring that awareness back, instead of chasing every loose end down. As soon as something draws your attention, boom. My personal bias is that one of the worst drivers of that is social media, because it gives you constant things to chase. And if you're not careful, the next thing you know, a lot of time has passed and you've really been aware of nothing except the different things you're chasing in that screen.
Yeah, it is. Social media can be a distraction, and you have to be aware of when it does become a distraction, right? Because it's just, I think I call them the three thieves, right? Of distraction, and social media is definitely one, because it'll take you down a rabbit hole for 4, 5, 6 hours at a time, and then you look up and you haven't accomplished anything, right? So it has to be intentional, right? And then what true academic empirical evidence are you really going to get from social media? That's when you get all the talking heads, when everybody think that they're an expert on everything. Right?
Yeah, if there were that many experts, things would probably be a little better shape than what they are.
Yeah, so there's not a whole lot of fluid thinking, right, that's going on from a social media perspective. And you just have to be able to recognize it and use it for the tool that it is, right? It's just like everybody's talking about AI, right? And I'm like, well, AI, all AI is all of these databases that exist. AI just scours all of those, and just pulls the information out. But it doesn't necessarily mean that the information is true.
Oh yeah, it'll give you some crazy stuff. If you don't believe it, I did this experiment last week actually with using one of the AI engines. Is I put a bunch of criteria about myself in there, say do not respond, but it goes into the thing of it. And before I did that, first thing I did was I searched some things about myself, and I got all this stuff that was, probably a whole bunch of different people would have the same name and some other different, identifying features. And then I redid the same exact search with putting in some true things, some real credential pieces. Mm-hmm. Totally different answers.
Yep. I've done the same thing
and
with me.
Still, it was not 100% right.
That's right.
Still, it's putting in some things that are not factual. So the long story short, it definitely has a role. What that role is, we have to understand, and it'll be another one of those dynamic equilibrium things.
Yep, it sure will, because I did the same thing with myself. I wonder what this thing is going to say about me. So I put it in. I'm like, don't know which Terry Jackson was talking about, but it wasn't talking about. It wasn't talking about me, right? Because there's some other guys out there, and I'm like, okay, wow, quite interesting, right? And so we have to be, as human beings, we have to be mindful of that, right? We can never let anything think for us. Because,
that's right.
Yeah, we can't let anything think for us. Just like we used to say, I can't let anybody think for me. You can't put words in my mouth. We shouldn't let AI do that for us.
And that's the magic of, the thing about fluid thinking is right now, even with all the incredible technology that exists, the human mind is still the fastest processor. It is still incredibly able to do that at levels that are, unparalleled in the machine world. And we just have to figure out how to make it safe. Mm-hmm. Nothing's totally safe. Mm-hmm. Make it safer and make it work for the greater good, and everything will be fine.
Yep, I would agree with you 100% on that. Sure do. I agree with that.
Well, man, I think we've been about as fluid as we can in the course of the last hour. I've enjoyed the conversation. I want to thank our listeners for joining us at unlikelyintersection.com, for joining us here on Facebook, YouTube as well. If you would like to catch me, docphilipbrown.com. And Terry? You
can catch me at LinkedIn, Terry Jackson, PhD. You can find me on Facebook as well. Also, I have about 5 books on Amazon that you can go and Google, from transformational thinking to co-creation leadership to how do leaders find the right note. And I'm sure that Dr. Brown, we can find your books on Amazon, or your book on Amazon as well.
Absolutely. There's a link on the website to that, or go straight to Amazon. Do You Speak Patient? We'd love to hear what you think about our work, and we'll see you at the next intersection.